Hello and welcome to Dollars and Cents, the Australia Institute podcast where we're talking about just what the hell is going on in the economy. I'm Elinor Johnston-Leake, the senior content producer at the Australia Institute, and for the final week of Greg being away, we've got Matt Grudnoff back again, our senior economist here at the Australia Institute. Hello, Matt.
One last time.
One last time. We better make it a good one, Matt. I think it will be a good one, actually, because we've got some pretty interesting stuff to talk about today. Last week, the federal government settled in the class action lawsuit that was brought against it for the victims of Robodebt. The government's agreed to pay $475 million, which might be the biggest class action settlement in Australian history. This brings the total cost of Robodebt to the government to $2.4 billion.
The largest class action in Australian history, the government compensating victims, the Robodebt scandal, in a payout worth more than $500 million.
Robodebt will now cost the federal government more than it was originally supposed to save.
Centrelink recipients were hounded. It resulted in the suicides of two young men.
People that have gone through divorce, become bankrupt, irreparable mental health issues that have stemmed from this.
Today is a day of vindication and validation for hundreds of thousands of Australians. Today is also a day of warning to governments and bureaucrats at all levels, not to recklessly and unlawfully attack the people who elected them.
In-house lawyers advised the Department of Social Services that the plan, quote, might not be consistent with the legislation. In other words, that it would be illegal without legislative change.
A royal commission found senior public servants were responsible for designing the scheme and knew it was illegal.
While there's been a large payout, victims want the Anti-Corruption Commission to take strong action against those responsible for the scheme.
Maybe before we get into everything, can you just give us a quick recap? What was Robodebt?
Yeah, Robodebt ran from 2015 to 2019. The previous coalition government were basically desperate to run a surplus and they thought, you know who has a lot of money? Welfare recipients. We should gouge money out of the welfare recipients.
Interesting, yep.
And so what the idea was is they would basically average income. So imagine, somebody submits their tax return and it shows that they earn X amount a year, and then they look and they say, well, but we gave you this amount of welfare payments, and it looks like you earned more money than you actually should have. And the problem with that is that let's say that you were working half the year for 6 months in a job, you lost your job, and then you were on unemployment benefits for the second half.
Like someone who is on unemployment benefits might,
yes.
Yeah,
exactly right. Fairly plausible basic idea. Now, for the first, if you look at their end of year when they submit their tax return, it looks like they earned far more than they should in order to get unemployment benefits because they were only claiming it for 6 months. So they had 6 months of work. And so what would happen under Robodebt is it would flag that. It would go, wait a minute, you've earned way more income than would entitle you to these unemployment benefits. We're going to charge you or generate a debt, basically, that says that you need to pay all of those back.
And that's the robo part, is it's just it automatically happened. Yep.
And, it's stupid to average. So, benefits like, say, unemployment benefit are based on what you earned in that fortnight, not what you earned over 12 months. So if you're unemployed for a fortnight, then, you might be eligible for unemployment benefits depending on, your assets and your other income and all sorts of other things. But if you average it over the entire year, that doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah.
And so, the scheme was absolutely flawed from the start. And look, if you're really cynical, which I am,
I know you are.
You
yes.
would say that the reason the government went after welfare recipients was because welfare recipients can't fight back. If a welfare recipient gets, a bill for, a few $1,000s, they are going to go, what can they do? They can't hire a lawyer. They can't go to court. They don't have the resources or the, the information to be able to fight this sort of thing. Whereas imagine if they did the opposite. Imagine they went after rich people, right? And they generated fake debts for rich people. So let's be clear, the government is basically generating fake debts. But if they were for rich people would be ringing their lawyer and straight in court,
Yeah.
right? And there's no way the government would get anything. They would challenge them all the way along the way. This was a cynical attempt for the government to try and gouge money out of vulnerable people, the poorest of the poor, in order to claw back some money so that they could run a budget surplus.
It also sort of plays on people's assumptions that the government, I assume a lot of people thought that, you get a letter from the government in the mail that says you owe money. They must be right. Yeah.
Exactly right. And part of the problem is that these people basically didn't know, like you're right, but also they didn't have the resources to be able to fight it.
Yeah.
They just thought, well, the easiest way is to struggle and scrimp and save and try and pay this back and make it go away. And throughout the process, the government, even when it became really obvious that this was a terrible idea and it wasn't working and it was wrong, what the government would do is they would, when people basically had taken, some of these welfare recipients were helped to go to court to challenge it, the government would settle the day before, like right before, so that there was no judgment. Because what the government didn't want was a judgment saying, this is all illegal, you're nuts to have this.
Yeah.
So they would settle and the government would wipe the debt. And so it took quite a long time, a lot longer than it should have, for this to all come out.
When it comes to the size of the lawsuit, the payout itself, how much does that mean, say, per person in terms of what they might receive?
Yeah, so that's a good question. It will depend on the circumstances of the individual. So it's not just an average amount. But we need to know that there were 470,000 people affected by Robodebt. So it was almost 500,000 people. So it was a huge number of people. The government is obviously going to lose massive amounts of money. Even in 2019, when the whole scheme was coming apart and it was basically ending, the government estimated that they had collected an extra $785 million, but up to that point, it had cost them $606 million to collect that $785 million. So even if the scheme wasn't illegal, let's be clear, it wasn't a great winner anyway. They weren't going to make a lot of money. Like originally they were talking about sort of $1.2 billion in extra revenue this was going to collect. It had fallen short and it had cost way more to do it. Now, obviously, they've paid out $2.4 billion. So this has been a massive loss. This was just an absolute stuff up from start to beginning. And, you might go, well, how could this happen? What I think I find most interesting about Robodebt was the then Services Minister, Scott Morrison, was the one who conceived of this idea. The then Treasurer, Scott Morrison, because he'd gone from Services Minister to, this isn't like a multiple ministries thing here, but this is him moving along, was the Treasurer who introduced all of this. And when it all fell apart, guess who was Prime Minister? Scott Morrison. This has his fingerprints all over it. And, it's just a really dark, terrible chapter in Australian history and kind of the culmination of this idea that, when we talk about welfare recipients, we're always talking about fraud. We're always talking about, these sort of people are taking or stealing from us. If you look at fraud in the welfare system, yes, it does happen. But if you compare it to other areas like business fraud or
wage theft,
it's actually tiny compared to these things. And yet this is what politicians focus on. And so it is not surprising that Australia largely went along with this. I mean, to be clear, this was largely hidden, but Australia largely went along with this. When you spend all of your time demonising a very poor, vulnerable part of our population and saying, well, these people, are more likely to be defrauding the system that, is supporting them, and we need to sort of claw this money back.
There was a royal commission that came after Robodebt. Did anything actually come from that in terms of people responsible facing any consequences?
Yeah, very little, unfortunately. So one of the main public servants involved in this actually died between when the Royal Commission happened and when the Robodebt scheme was sort of happening. And unfortunately, I think she was blamed. Like she was, from what we saw, she was a part of it.
Yeah.
But I
It's a
think
very
they
convenient
took advantage.
scapegoat.
Yeah. And so she was blamed heavily for it. Another important architect or somebody heavily involved in the public service was moved on and put in charge of AUKUS. You may remember back.
Another stellar project by the Australian government.
When the Royal Commission was on, she was stood down and then she resigned. So she wasn't sacked, but, perhaps she would have, but she resigned. The Australian Public Service Commission investigated a bunch of people. That has remained sealed. And they reported that there had been some fines and some demotions, but nobody was sacked. The NAC, the Federal Corruption Watchdog, actually looked into it and decided that it wouldn't pursue the matter further. There was a huge outrage and there was a big political kerfuffle and there was all kinds of claims. And they then did a review, an external review of that decision, and it was decided that that was wrong. And that now the NAC is investigating, and they're currently investigating 6 people. We don't know who they are, and the investigation is still ongoing. So as of now, nobody has been sacked because of this. There have been some demotions and fines. That woman lost her job because she resigned. But there has been actual, very little when you think about, people committed suicide. People suffered hugely from this. And to be super clear, it was illegal. What they were doing was illegal. The court found that this was illegal. The Royal Commission found that this was illegal. And the government has had to pay $2.4 billion for this terrible episode. And there really hasn't been a lot of accountability. And at the political level, there hasn't been any accountability.
Directly stealing from among of our society's, most vulnerable people. Yeah. There were some recommendations as well made by the Royal Commission. Have any of those actually been enacted?
Yes. So there have been changes. Basically, one of the problems with Robodebt was that the debts were generated without any human looking at them. So they were basically just taking data, matching them to people, and then making calculations and then sending a debt notice out to somebody. And one of the big changes that was made is that whenever a debt notice is sent out, a human basically has to check it. And that, no doubt, will mean that somebody will look at it and go, but wait a minute, you haven't considered this, or wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. And they're able to look into it further. That's probably the main thing. But, there's no reason why this might not happen again. I mean, we've been talking a lot about AI.
Yeah, I was going to ask, with sort of AI becoming more prominent and also with the government talking about using AI more to do things like, assess environmental red tape and things like that, is there a danger of AI being used in a way that might, have similar consequences? Yeah,
look, under the current system, no, but there's no reason that can't change in the future. And as I said, it comes down to demonizing a particular group. And if we go back down that path of only thinking about people on welfare benefits being these others that, are taking from us, that are always engaged in fraud, it's entirely possible that if some future government will think, well, yeah, they're an easy target, let's use AI this time to basically go after them and try and reduce this terrible scourge of welfare fraud, when they wouldn't think about doing it in other areas where far more fraud is more likely to occur.
Because it's a lot easier to get away with it.
Yeah. They're people who struggle to be able to protect themselves. They're weak, and, bullies go after weak people, and that's essentially what we're seeing here.
Well, it's good to see that the class action lawsuit has at least, resulted in a large payout for those who deserve it. Yeah. Also in the news, Matt, I have heard a little rumour that Labor might be getting cold feet, and they might be about to dump their plans to reform superannuation tax concessions, or at least water them down.
Well, the Fin Review's political editor Phil Coorey today says the government is considering changes to its controversial tax on superannuation funds with more than $3 million in them. The report says that the Prime Minister Anthony Albanese in particular has been urged by former Prime Minister Paul Keating to consider changing the plan.
A tax targeting grandmas, a tax robbing your kids of inheritance, a tax that will force hard-working Aussies to sell their farm. So with all of these headlines, this proposed change to the superannuation tax must be a massive, disastrous deal, right? Well, not really.
Every year there's about $48 billion worth of tax concessions on superannuation, and nearly 60% of it is going to the richest 20%.
Now, I think people recognise that those with more than 3 million, pick a number, right, that there should be some means of taking more tax from them, of not giving them what is effectively a significant amount, tens of billions of dollars of years in benefit. But there's a point at which you say, well, how much is enough? And how much is really sitting in there, really almost as a means of transferring wealth to the next generation, rather than trying to provide a genuine sum of money that you can live on.
Live on something during their retirement. That was the purpose of it. Okay, if people are getting $3 million in there and investing in all this, that's not the purpose of superannuation. They can continue to have those investments. It is not the purpose of superannuation.
We've talked quite a bit about these tax concessions before, but can you just give us a bit of a rundown of what's going on?
Yeah, so these are tax concessions that Labor took to the last election. Basically, they only impact 0.5% of super accounts, those with more than $3 million. And the proposed changes will reduce the tax concession that these super accounts get.
The proposed changes that they took to the election, which they then won an election on.
Exactly right, yep. And so the idea is that most super is taxed at 15%. If you had a balance over 3 million, then that part that's over 3 million wouldn't be taxed at 15%, it would be taxed at 30%. So the tax would go up. But to be clear, if you've got $3 million in super, you're probably a high income earner and your marginal tax rate is therefore probably 47 cents. So rather than being taxed at 47%, you're actually still on a tax concession, you're only being taxed at 30%. So it's a reduction in the tax concession you get, but you still get super tax concession, which is crazy, right? So people with $3 million in their super account do not need help saving for their retirement.
Yeah, how many people actually have over $3 million in their super?
60,000 accounts, 0.5%.
Yeah, so really not very many people at all.
Tiny amount.
Yeah.
It's only affecting the very, very wealthy. And it was a good change. And because they have, despite the fact that this group is very small, they're incredibly wealthy, this would actually raise over $2 billion a year.
Wow. Yeah. From such a small change.
Yeah. From a small change, it'll raise quite a lot of money, which shows you how much wealth is concentrated in such a tiny group. Now, we were just talking about people who can't defend themselves.
Yeah.
Let's go to the other end of the spectrum of people who can defend themselves. Wealthy people can defend themselves. And they have launched a big campaign against this. And look, the Prime Minister has been very clear on a whole bunch of issues that what he is very interested in is doing what he promised to do before the last election. Carrying through with his promises. And if he didn't promise to do it, he's not going to do it. So you would think that given how strong he has been on this, that he would absolutely follow through with this. But look, we haven't heard anything yet.
Okay.
But everybody's gone to ground in the government on this, which is usually a sign that some sort of watering down is going to happen.
Okay.
And so there is concern that the government is going to walk away from some of this reform.
So, but if they went to the election on this, it only affects a very, very, very small amount of people. Why would they not want to do this?
Yeah, so there was a big push from
the
wealthy people, but also people who help wealthy people hide their money, right? Or not hide their money, reduce their tax. But that has always been a small minority. All the polling that I've seen on this has shown that overwhelmingly it has strong public support.
Yeah.
Like, won't somebody think of the millionaires is essentially the problem with this. So the two main things that opponents have pointed out is that the $3 million threshold isn't indexed. So in 30 or 40 years' time, way in the future, it might start not just capturing the mega rich, but might actually start capturing simply rich people.
And indexation, just to be clear, is increasing alongside inflation.
Yes, that's right. So the threshold doesn't increase slightly each year in order to make sure it only captures this top 0.5%.
So there's some people who say, well, I don't have 3 million in my super now, but
But in 40 years' time, yeah,
maybe.
exactly right. And to be clear, there's nothing that would stop a future government from increasing the threshold, right? So it's a pretty lame kind of talking point or argument. The other one is that this will actually capture unrealised capital gains. So we've talked a lot about capital gains before with you.
Yes.
But basically, usually the way the system works at the moment is that until you sell an asset and make the capital gain, you're not taxed at all. And to be clear, because of the way capital gains are taxed, it's taxed pretty lightly anyway. But the idea is that a super fund basically has all the assets in it valued every year. That happens right now as part of a super fund, whether it's a self-managed super fund or an industry super fund or a retail super fund, whatever it is, they're all valued. And so what the government is simply saying is that, well, when, we look at all of the assets, we will tax you on unrealised gain. So if, the assets in your super fund went up a bit in value, and again, only for those above 3 million, everybody else,
it doesn't affect. Yeah.
Just people with super funds of more than 3 million, they will, instead of paying the tax when they sell the asset in one big lump, they'll pay it bit by bit each year. And so that was the other thing that people were outraged about.
Talking about, paying tax on money they haven't actually made.
Yeah, and to be clear, there are other ways we pay taxes on unrealised gains. I mean, if you think of your rates, if you own a home, and I'm sure, Elinor, you don't own a home.
But not quite yet, no.
But for listeners out there who do own a home, your rates notice is based on the current value of your land, right? Not the realised value of your land. And you pay tax based on the current value of your land. So there are certainly other ways in which we pay tax on unrealised gains. So again, not a great argument. And the other problem that often, stops legislation going through is the Parliament, right? So it might get through the lower house, for example, but the Senate might stop it.
Is it going to? Surely not.
So the Greens are broadly supportive of this.
Yeah.
They've made nothing but positive sounds about it. And so there's no indication that they couldn't pass it, that they don't have a majority in both houses if Labor and the Greens agree to this. And so there's no real reason for this not to happen. Yes, there is some in the community. There is a small, very noisy group of people who think that this shouldn't happen. But to be clear, the government went to the election saying that they would do this. They won the election. They have a mandate, according to the PM, of doing this. If they don't, then what does this say about any reform that the Albanese government? I mean, Albanese has been rightly criticised when you compare him to other Labor prime ministers, of not being a great reforming prime minister, right? And his biggest excuse is, well, if I don't go to an election about it, I'm not going to make that change.
Yeah.
If he's not even willing to reform the things that he did go to an election for, if he's not even willing to fight for those, even when he has, a pathway to pass it, then what's the point? What's the point of being prime minister?
Yeah.
What's the point
making
of us
election promises?
What's the point of electing a Labor Party to government if they're not going to govern?
And I mean, talking about this issue and then the Robodebt issue back to back, it really just shows, I suppose, the sort of reaction when it comes to the difference between how we approach taxing the wealthy, maybe just a tiny bit more, compared to apparently, the poorest of the poor, the media framing around the two. I mean, if the government were to pass these tax concession changes as they went to the election promising to do, how much, say, could they increase JobSeeker by with the revenue that they'd get?
Yeah, look, I mean, $2 billion a year would substantially increase JobSeeker. I think JobSeeker currently costs, I don't remember the latest figures, but sort of looking recently, I think it was around $10 billion a year. So that's 20% of JobSeeker, almost a quarter, because it's just over $2 billion, almost a quarter. So you could increase JobSeeker by around 25%, a quarter higher, just with this money. Now, look, the government hasn't said that that's what they're going to do,
No.
but just to put those kind of things in context, Robodebt only collected less than $800 million over multiple years. You know, this is talking about collecting, over $2 billion every year. That money can be used to increase job seeker. It can be used to pay for better health,
fund aged care,
fund aged care, childcare. We've seen huge issues in childcare at the moment. Look, there are all sorts of ways that the currently revenue-starved, governments, both state and federal, are suffering from. And they're constantly saying, well, we don't have enough money to do good things. Let's hope that, no, they haven't got cold feet and they've simply gone quiet for some unknown reason.
Yeah.
But look, if they do try and water this down, this is going to be a terrible tragedy, and it's going to speak volumes of the kind of reform that we can expect from this government in the future.
Yeah, thank you so much for chatting about two seemingly disparate topics, but really that both say a lot about where our government and our society is at the moment, I suppose.
Yeah, and look, also, just on another note, don't forget we've got the Revenue Summit coming up.
We sure do.
Elinor will be there, so if you
I'll
buy
be
a
there.
ticket,
You'll be there.
Come along and say hello to us.
Yep.
Greg will be back, and so he's back next week, so he will definitely be at the Revenue Summit. So come along and say hello to Greg as well.
It will be on October the 29th at Parliament House in Canberra. So if you're at all interested in learning about how the government can raise revenue better, come along and check it out. We'll leave a link to tickets in the show notes. This episode of Dollars and Cents was recorded on Thursday, the 11th of September. If you want to read any of our research into the superannuation tax concessions or anything else like that, you can go to our website at australiainstitute.org.au. Music, as always, is from Blue Dot Sessions, and we'll see you all next week.
Bye.